Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition to Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I am here with my good friend Joshua Davidson. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well, actually. I got a lot of things done this week and
Yeah,
I feel accomplished, but my body is feeling it.
bro. It's funny how the older you get, the more you feel it too. I'm just. It was funny the other day. I was like, man, my back is sore. And then I remember, dude, I was just lifting a couple things in the winery, and it was like, it, now I'm sore. It's like, dude, that would have never messed with me before.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, I feel you on that.
um, yeah, just the older you get, bro. It's the craziest thing. Well, guys, I am back. And I've got a treat for you guys. Because we're getting into that fall season, I wanted to talk a little bit about the paranormal, about ghosts and stuff like this. So I wanted to first like talk to Josh maybe and just kind of open the subject of ghost hunting. If you noticed on the overlay, this overlay, there are several devices. This is what I really want to focus on are those devices around the ghost, right? Because these are like some hallmark things that people use when they're ghost hunting. But first, I wanted to open it up and to see if like anybody had any stories. And I want to open this up also to the audience if they have like maybe some cool stories they want to share and maybe even share like their views on the paranormal because it's very prevalent today. Like the YouTube, I mean, it's a big sector in YouTube. These
Oh
ghost
yeah.
hunting videos, like Sam and Colby. You've got Jason Hawes is putting stuff out. You've got the Ghost Brothers doing YouTube now, and then one of the biggest ones is Project Fear, and that's one I actually like. I like those guys. They seem pretty like just fun to be around. So I do watch those shows. I love ghost hunting shows. I always have, and I've seen some pretty incredible things that are done on camera, but I'm not sure about the other equipment. Although I still have a hard time debunking the EVP devices when there's like a direct response, right? So like I don't know how to quite explain that, but I do want to get into those things. But first, Josh, man, I mean, what do you think is going on here with all this hype around the paranormal?
Yeah. Are you asking why do I think people have a sudden increase of interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, with this seems to be getting really popular. People doing their
Mm.
own ghost hunting videos. I'm even seeing live TikToks of people just out in like the middle of a gravesite, trying to pick up stuff.
I think that one of the main reasons for the increase in it is that it is plainly taboo. And we've come into a place in culture where we've come to, in at least in the political and religious arena, in the worldview conversations, oftentimes what we're doing is, I'd say, fetishizing the edge of the world.
There you
The
go.
sooner you can find the thing that inverts expectations for shock value, you've really got it. And that seems to be saturating our movies, our music, our production, our just about everything in the entertainment industry, as well as let's say in the religious sphere. You have a huge uptick in interest in spirituality, but spirituality that's disjointed from any sort of tradition. And then on a personal level, I think a lot of people are getting interested in it because they're tired of being fed a bunch of lies about how the universe is material and nature's all there is. I think we intuitively know that that's crap, and that we like nobody wants to believe that, except for the people who are afraid enough that they would run from this idea. They look to that for some sort of comfort. Um, C.S. Lewis made a joke about it one time and said, if one must see ghosts, it doesn't help to not believe in them. Then you just add the difficulty of being a madman on top of your troubles. You know what I mean? So if the paranormal is going to exist, we might as well have a worldview that can include it. And right now, presently, the culture just doesn't. And so I think that's why, because it's a taboo and because it's fetishized as the edge of the world, anything spiritual is like naturally attractive, especially things that push the boundary of what seems appropriate. So I think that's one of the main reasons why it's become fad like.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, man. And I think people grip onto that spirituality, and kind of, as long as it's not part of something organized, like it's not what they were taught as Christians in a Christian household growing up, and they've turned away from it. As long as it's not linked to a, like you said, a tradition, I think they pick up on it and they want to accept it more because it's not what they were taught before, which I think comes down to I don't want to say altruism, but like this desire to be different than what they've been taught. I don't know. It's kind of, I want to say it's almost, I don't want to say narcissistic, but it's kind of just,
It's rebellious.
it's rebellious. Yes.
Well, I
That's
mean,
that's a good way
imagine
to
our
put it.
entire culture has been defined by the division between tradition and the protest of tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Especially
mean,
us as Protestants in Protestant land, and America is firmly a Protestant land. Like
mhm,
most of the world now, especially in its most developed places, societally speaking, most places that have the richest places in the world are places that were founded on religious worldviews, but religious worldviews that were founded, let's say, post Reformation time frame. And so protest and rebellion is kind of a feature of our lives, like in general, to push back and find the boundary, and not only find the boundary, but ask why it's there to begin with, and really
yeah.
just question everything. Post enlightenment, post reformation, I don't think it's avoidable at this point. I think it's kind of just a
Yeah.
feature of the way that we think, is to find boundaries and figure out why they're there.
Yeah, but not only that, but like, Amber points out that the culture has been defined in America by rebellion, and yes, I mean that's how we
Mhm.
want our independence, right? I mean,
Right.
it's ingrained. It's ingrained into Americans to fight. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's like, that's very true. Another aspect I was really thinking on as you were saying that stuff was, uh, um, it could also be a product of the war that Christianity has endured since its beginning, right? So, like, even in America, where people are falling off the church wagon, they're not going to church like they should, or holding to any of those, trying to separate themselves from that, like you said, a boundary, or separate themselves from a moral system that the culture's been at war against, and it's not prevailing necessarily, but there's a generation that's coming up that is lacking the values that maybe we once had in an earlier time frame, and I think that that also plays into this fascination with the paranormal and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that we want to pursue taboos, and like I was saying, fetishize the edge of the world, and
Right. Yeah.
to emphasize the place of things that are marginal, and especially in the political landscape, we've become rather obsessive, almost cultish about our emphasis on what is marginal, and then reshaping even the moral platitudes that people use to correct one another are shaped around the idea that somehow to be marginal, to be unique, to be different is
Mhm.
like an ultimate virtue of some kind now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Josh, is when these people try to be different and all this stuff, they're the same as everybody else at that point. It's
Hmm.
like, here's a great example. I use this, and it's a joke. It's kind of a joke, but it's kind of also, it is part of this idea. When I grew up, everybody was getting tattoos. You know, when I was small, when I was a kid, only a few people had them. Right, like my stepdad, he was a biker, so he had one on each arm. That was it. Right, but like, that became a fad, right? And all these people end up getting tattoos, and they're like, "Oh, yes, this describes this, and this is my tattoo here. This is my tattoo here." And it's like, dude, now everybody's got a tattoo. It's not different to be somebody that has a tattoo now. You know what
Right.
I
If you
mean?
want to be distinct, you have clean skin.
Yeah, yeah, so I was like, I'm not getting a tattoo. So, I guess that's part of my counterculture type thing as well. I that rebellious streak there. But I think there's also this intuitive nature for us that have a certain worldview, take a stand against the things that are against that worldview. But to hone this back in, I want to go to this intuitive side that you brought up just a minute ago as well, because this has been really racking my mind too over the last couple weeks, as I've been looking into this stuff again. Is there's, I think, a natural intuition, like you mentioned with C.S. Lewis and stuff like that, um, about the paranormal being out there. It's there, and I don't think we can deny it. Now, I wanted to ask you specifically this because it has this it has a link to the imagination, right?
Mhm.
We're fascinated by creatures. We're fascinated by stories that involve monsters and fantasy, and a world that's not like this, but is magical. That sense of awe and that sense of wonder. Do you think that also fuels this desire to want some of these paranormal things to be real? And puts it gives us the idea of what it should look like and kind of manifests itself that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the imagination is like say, okay, so just to distinguish a little bit, fantasy, I would say, is the place where people go when they don't want reality, and imagination is the place where they go when they want to know how reality is when you're not looking, if that makes
Right.
sense. And so I think imagination is exactly the thing that is growing and breeding most of what it is we understand, the idea of ghosts and spirits and monsters and those things that live at the edge that you don't encounter every day, that you encounter seldomly, if at all. And the people that do encounter them usually end up being the kind of people that end up on the edge because what they've seen radically alters whatever it is that they expect from reality. And so people look at them and go, you're no longer playing the social game properly. You're a little bit too out there, so you should go out there. You know what I mean? And so there used to be these
Right.
lines of separation between those things, that kind of created the sense of normalcy versus paranormal, right? But
Mhm.
it seems like in the modern world, the distinction between nature and supernature, as we would probably like to call it, is a lot sharper than it used to be in cultures where things like, the fairy tale were actually birthed. People back then didn't think that
Mhm.
that reality was separated that
Right.
starkly. They didn't really expect that, there would be like a lot of the times now we'll use different words to refer to this separation. We'll say things like a spiritual dimension or a spiritual realm. And we make these lines of separation, but I think they actually have direct overlap. I don't think there is a
Yeah.
separation. I think I think the paranormal world is in fact the one that we live in. And a lot of what people have as far as their stories of paranormal experiences, some of them may be misnomers and some of them may be genuine, but a lot of the time, what we're very concerned with, and I think this ties directly into your intent for the episode, is what we're really concerned with often is trying to test and measure those things that are not in accordance with material nature, with
Mhm.
with the sciences that are in accordance with material nature. We
Right.
want to be ghost hunting materialists for whatever reason. It's a very weird situation to be in because most of the experiences that people have genuinely with the supernatural are not things that are like, experiments that can be repeated. They're not that
Right.
kind of thing. There's something completely different. And so I think a lot of the time we're looking in the right direction with the wrong intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I hear you, I definitely do, and I think I agree with you in large part. Um, I also think that there could be something to, I don't wanna say measure, maybe, but to experience. Like, maybe is there a device that maybe we can create that, like you say, it's not separated. But even the Bible talks about like a veil, or we see through a glass darkly, or maybe it maybe the separation is just us, you know what I mean? Being in our own minds, or our spirits being so corroded with, whether it's I don't want to say just sin, but just distraction, you know?
Well, it's also the case
Or
that most of reality we can't see anyway. Like, it's
oh
not all
yeah,
that strange that there would be an entire facet of reality that we just simply have no apparatus to access. Because
right.
even your eyes can't access all of the color spectrum, your ears can't access every frequency. Most of reality is irrelevant and inaccessible to you. And
Yeah.
so there's lots of things that happen in that hidden space that are veiled to you that are still part of material reality. So if there are things that are not part of material reality that reside here alongside us, all the more. There's probably miles of ocean of things that we can't explore just on the house. Like, it's just sitting there waiting, right? But I think that the separation that we want to bring to it nowadays is one that's a false comfort, where we refuse to think about the idea of spirits in the same breath as we think about supernovas, because
Right.
supernovas are those physical phenomena that have testable results. And, there are things that you can look at and try to discern materially. And oftentimes, what we want to do is assume, and I think it's for the convenience of our hope and expectation, is just assume that because something interacts with material reality, it therefore should be discernible by something material. And I think that's probably where the main error, I think, would be, is it's not necessary, because you and I can discern the paranormal because we are in fact not materially confined. Like, you and I don't have simply a body. You and I have a body, but we are not just a body, right? We are
Mhm.
also a supernatural entity combined with body. So we have the faculty, our physical apparatus has the faculty that material things with batteries and microphones and so forth have some serious limitations. And yet, those microphones and cameras and battery operated instruments have things that can, let's say, detect things that our bodies cannot, namely
Mhm.
things like frequencies of light, color spectrum, sound, and things like that. And so if we amplify the physical parts of our body that experience some of those paranormal things, we think this gives us a better reach. So we're just adding technology to ourselves the same way, a soldier adds a sword to his hand. Now it's no longer just my fist that's the weapon. My fist has a sharp extension of itself that I
Yeah.
can use to extend my power in reality. And so I think that EMP devices and voice recordings and cameras and all of those different devices are really trying to amplify faculties we already have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we think
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
think that those faculties are the thing that gives us experience of the supernatural. And I think it's
Yeah.
it's not necessarily just those physical things. It's the addition of the metaphysical part of you that even makes any of those things what they are, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Oh no, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, they're really just they're trying to catch something with equipment that may be able to capture different parts of like reality that we're unable to access right away, is what I'm hearing you're saying basically.
Yeah.
And that's like and it's fascinating, but like you said, those things have limitations, right? And you're gonna miss things, still, I think. It's still not totally accessible by those, uh, by those things as well. So, yeah, I don't know what the answer is to maybe for these guys that are in this field, but I don't think the equipment they have now. I mean, there's also a lot of other things that can give you false positives, right? There's
Hmm.
several of these devices, and it's so funny because we're going to bring in some other aspects, and I don't want to ruin it yet because I do want to talk about these devices a little later. But um, so Josh switch sides. It looks like you're facing away from David.
There you go. No, I'm not forsaking
Oh,
you.
you're not forsaking me. His back is not turned. No, but yeah, man. So like, I think we covered a lot of like the basis of what what drives this, right? What drives this fascination, right? And there's it's true. There are a lot of faulty things with the devices within themselves. And not only that, but there's a problem with the worldview as well, and I agree with that. Um, but let's get into like specifics, Josh. Have you yourself had any type of paranormal experiences?
Oh yeah, loads. I
Yeah.
grew up in a household that my mom, from a very young age, fostered in me an expectation that what you see is the least part of what's real. And so I grew up in a house where I kind of, it seemed second nature to have an expectation that reality was just furnished with all kinds of things that you couldn't normally interact with and couldn't see. As a kid, I probably wouldn't have phrased it that way, obviously, but you know, when I was younger, I had quite a few experiences, especially because my mom personally have had herself in the, let's say, the personal business of trying to get other people who were in bad spots in life out of their ruts and back into, you know, real life, being a normal functioning healthy person who can take care of themselves and treat themselves like somebody that they're worth caring for. And it's like a lot of those people were in positions of addiction and spiritual oppression. And in the course of my life, even very young and into my teenage years, my mom taught me how to pray out in the name of Jesus and to expect, you know, that when you invite God into the room, that darkness will be upset and flee to whatever degree. And that if you're on God's radar, you're also on the radar of darkness. And that's just kind of to be expected. And so I was raised with a worldview that included all of those things from the get-go. And then from my own experiences, one of the ones that was probably the most profound is when I was probably about 13, 14, I think I was. And my parents had a red Honda Accord that my dad would drive around very often. And one day he left the house to go to Blockbuster to return a DVD that we had rented. That's how long ago this was. And so my dad was returning a rented movie, and he got literally down the hill, which is about 5 houses from my house, and he got to the side of an intersection and pulled over in a parking lot and ran home into the house, closed the door, left the car down the hill with the keys in it, ran away from the car because he looked in his rearview mirror and saw the face of something that was plainly demonic, that was sneering at him from the back seat of the car. And it scared him so badly that he ran home. And I have maybe twice in my life seen that man cry in my entire life. And he was fearful like I have never seen in my entire life. And he's somebody that did a 12-year stint in prison and was pretty high ranking in some of the brotherhoods that were there, and is covered in tattoos and is just a bulldog of a human. And he was scared out of his wits. And so me and my mom walked down the hill and prayed out the vehicle so that we could take it home. And in that experience, it wasn't me that saw something, but there was definitely a presence to the car when I got there. And it was one of those things where you almost felt like you were walking against a headwind, and there was effort trying to approach the thing. But when you arrived there, it's not like it was a windy day. It was rather hot out, you know? And so it's just all of the experience that added up. My body had the least part of the experience. It was mostly, in some sense, a very spiritual experience, but in a way that I would say is a very negative sense. It was not like the kind of presence that you feel when you go to church. But there was definitely a presence that pressed on you when you,
or you go to grandma's house that's been a Christian all her life.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
No, I get it, man. No, I tell you, now this brings me to a different. Okay, so you had this experience where you felt it. Have you ever uh, seen something yourself?
Yes, but it wasn't a ghost experience. That was something that was very much more a experience of God rather than an experience of the paranormal as such. And so I would put that in a different category necessarily. But I have had experiences of, okay, maybe sight is the wrong word. I have had experiences in which I could, in some sense, visibly detect something, but not in a way that was purely visible. It's hard to explain, but sort of like the corner of the eye experience where it's vivid here, and then you look at it and it's not vivid anymore, right?
Oh, wow.
Something that looks like a physical form in your periphery, which is
Mhm.
undefined and relies on motion. It's mostly black and white. It's not defined at all. Just like your fovea is the opposite. It's very focused and you can see right here in front of you, but here you can't see. Right here, my hand is invisible. Right.
Right.
And so, right about on the threshold of vision
Mhm.
is usually where something like that would be most present. And then you look at it, and upon looking at it, it's not there. That's sort of the veiling thing that I think you were talking about. But I've had lots of experiences like that, especially in my house when I was a child. I grew up in a house and that there was a lot of weird stuff that happened. My dad and my mom had experience upstairs, and I had probably 2 experiences of it, but I never had the full apparition. Like my dad seemed to have the worst luck with these things. But there was an evidently a little girl that was in my parents' bedroom upstairs and would love to play with the TV static. And for whatever reason, she chose my mom's bedroom and fiddled with the TV a bunch of times, whatever. I have had the peripheral vision of this girl sitting on the stairs leading up to my parents' bedroom, and had the experience of hearing what I would say is the sound of crying, but without a voice. Like there was no. This is all very hard to explain in
No,
any
understood,
detail, but
man. By all, but yeah,
it's kind of
understood.
like when you hear a voice, you can tell it comes from a throat.
Yeah.
This almost sounded like a noise that came from not a throat,
Well,
but it
yeah.
was crying.
Let's call it. Let's call it what it is. It's a disembodied voice of some
Yeah.
sort.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I think
Absolutely.
that's what I
Yeah.
mean is I couldn't detect the note of it being a body that made the sound,
Yeah.
but it sounded distinctly like a young girl crying. And I had that
Wow.
visible off screen, let's say, experience. And it was, oh, hi, Amber. It was in, it's hard to, like I said, it's just hard to qualify using the senses, because when I say seeing, that has a lot of baggage. When I say hearing, that has a lot of baggage and a lot of assumptions that come with it that I think are very difficult to manage with any honesty.
Yeah, and not only that, but like you said, it's hard to describe, right? Like
Yeah.
when you see something peripherally, like you're talking about, it's hard to describe. Or you hear something, and it doesn't sound like the normal, right? It's abnormal. It's like that disembodied voice that can come out abnormally, right?
Mhm.
And it's just hard to describe. Plain and simple. I get it. Hello, Amber. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good.
Right on. You said, Amber, that you had
Uh-huh.
some people from Haiti and the Caribbean, and this interests me
Mhm.
because my stepdad lives in Puerto Rico, right?
Mhm.
So, I'll tell my stories about stuff in Puerto Rico in a little bit, but I want you to go ahead
Uh-huh.
and maybe enlighten us on what you've been hearing so far.
Oh, well, at seminary, one day we were talking about in prophets class, you have to get into visions and dreams and what are visions and dreams. And so we had a after conversation with a bunch of us talking about how when they came to America, they were so surprised that people were so resistant to the idea that visions and dreams could come from God, and that was a real thing, and how closed off Americans felt to them, in touch with just the spiritual realm at all. And talking about like, I have a brother who's Haitian, and so I've been there, been there for before, and it's really interesting. You can feel just in the air. Some of those places that we went just felt dark and evil, and there would be this, everybody was very jumpy and be like, don't touch that because that's a place where they would sacrifice voodoo sacrifices, or there's like all these things going on. And you could see at one time we were driving somewhere and the driver slammed on the brakes and stopped because he was convinced that he saw a witch doctor jump in front of the vehicle, and the rest of us didn't see anything. And it was just like, so they were talking about those were, like warnings from either from the evil or from good, one way or the other, like these warnings that were very much tied to everything spiritual. And so it was very much, an interesting conversation that they were so more spiritually attuned to even be open to the idea that, that they were comfortable with it. When you die, you don't go straight to wherever you think people go when they die. That you were given the opportunity to walk around and to visit those who were left behind, to maybe give them a chance to change their mind, or to be a part of a curse to plague someone after they were, haunt them after they were dead. Like, it was, to them, that was a non sequitur, that just was the reality. And they were confused by the fact that we weren't even open to some of those ideas.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you said that. Like, I really think that's cool because these guys, like you said, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's part of their everyday life, you know. But where I get fascinated is there's a reason it's a part of their
Mm-hmm.
everyday life. It's a
Yeah.
reason that they're not resistant to it. Is because they get it from somewhere. It's these
Yeah.
ideas, they're not just out of the blue, or they come from Bram Stoker's book back in the 1600s. No, there's a reason
Mm-hmm.
that people are fascinated by this, and it's because they're having real experiences, I
Mm-hmm.
think. I'm also noticing, and I'll let you jump in it after I make this point because it's fresh in my head right now. I don't want to forget.
Mm-hmm.
But like the demographics is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're talking about like America being resistant,
Mm-hmm.
I think that plays into why we haven't seen it as much, or why we
Mm-hmm.
don't take note of it as much. That's part of it. Is we're distracted. We don't take it seriously. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not saying that, oh, well, that's because we're better than they are, or something like that, or it's because we're stronger or something like that. No, I think we're being protected
Mm-hmm.
in large part. I think that there's a protection over us as a people, and it allows us to take it for granted. But
Mm-hmm.
at some point in time, that protection is going to come off, if we take it for granted. And I think we're going to have uh um our eyes are going to be open to something, and we're not going to like it, you know
Mm-hmm.
but yeah. And I think demographics do come into play, like where you're talking about Haiti. I mean, the Caribbean. I don't know if you know this, but in Puerto Rico, they actually have studies on the paranormal.
Yeah.
And Puerto Rico is one of the top places where there's a lot of this paranormal stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to like San Juan, right? And you're staying in the touristy places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Never gonna see it. You're never gonna see it. You go to Buccarone on the west side in the touristy areas, it's gonna pass you by. You start
Mm-hmm.
mingling with the locals, just go right outside the town, you start mingling with the locals,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna experience it. And it's gonna be in your face. And if you're spiritually tuned, if you're a Christian, you're definitely gonna pick it up
Mm-hmm.
like right away. And it blew my mind how prevalent it was. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I mean, it is part of their everyday life, and I know why. I've
Mm-hmm.
experienced it.
When we were in Torah class, and we were going through walking through the books of the Torah, didn't get very far. We got to the story of Noah, and there was a guy in our class who was from Kenya, and we were walking through that story and the symbolism of it, and everything. And he raised his hand and started telling us this really beautiful Kenyan legend about that. It's ancient, about something about the ancestors crossing over on something that looks like a rainbow. And so there's this like connection in and about this bridge to the other side that the ancestors come back and forth on, that looks like this rainbow and this connection. And he talked about that, how that has been something that they've been able to use in teaching people about connections with God, because there's already that built-in connection there with the rainbow and the ancestors and the spiritual side. So there's already some built-in beautiful connections there too. And that was really fun to have some conversations and unpack some of those traditional things as well. So I think they can be there for positive and for negative. I think there's some beautiful connections both ways.
Yeah. Josh?
I think that the fact that these people are in a place where they're shocked that rationalized enlightenment people are
Mhm.
not comfortable with acknowledging an immaterial reality shows how far down the tubes, let's say, a
Mhm.
modernized Christianity has allowed itself to become materialism in disguise, where God is a
Yeah.
convenience to explain some of the things that we think are
Mhm.
positive attributes to reality. But any of the things that we can't put in a test tube, we want first off to be skeptical and dismissive of. And I think that it's not a positive feature.
Mhm.
Not that being rational and using science and the scientific method and exploring material reality hasn't been a net good of its own, because that's how the medical sciences and lots of other things that we use are absolutely part of that scientific venture. But the idea that science is the end all highest priority and the only means by which we detect truth in
Mhm.
reality, I think ended up being more crippling than anything else.
Yeah, and when I was and at school, I've talked to every non-Western student there, and have just about their experiences in America and how it's been going, and every single one of them has mentioned that they have been to at least a dozen churches of different traditions, and the American church is spiritually dead. And I was just shocked that all of them, not having talked to each other, all have come to the same conclusion that we're so spiritually disconnected that churches feel dead. And
Yeah.
it was amazing to me.
Absolutely. So just like I asked Josh, Amber, have you had
Mhm.
any experiences yourself with the paranormal? You could we can arrange it and then we can unpack it because I'll go through mine as
Mhm.
well. So, but
Okay. Well,
by all means.
I mean, that's gonna kinda depend on your definition. Like, I've had some of the ones here that we kind of think about things like one day I was driving and thought I saw a little kid run in front of my car, and I had to, like, stop and be, like, looking all over for this kid that she wasn't real. Lots of things like, uh, standing out and being, like, outside for a walk, and all of a sudden there's music coming from somewhere, and it's, a trail, and there's nobody around, and there's no source of where that music should be coming from. There's um one time at my great grandmother's house when I was a kid, there was this one room, and every time you'd walk into it, the light would come on, and you didn't have to touch anything. You just walk into the room and the light would come on. It didn't have motion sensors or anything. It was weird. And I remember when my trip to Haiti, when we were there, we had gotten to invited to participate in a couple of exorcisms of demons, which was really strange to be involved in that. So, but I think that's the ones I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, that's wild. Like, and it's so funny is like as we're discussing this, right? As we're discussing the hype around the paranormal and this and that, we've
Mhm,
all had experience and we come from the Western civilized world.
mhm,
So, like, even though there is this vast disconnect over the demographic, there's still so much,
mhm,
so many people intuitively, I think, as well, fascinated by this,
mhm,
fascinated by, like Josh says, the stuff that would that breaches the edge of the world type thing,
right,
and I think for me, I've had several run-ins with it. Like I said, when I went to Puerto Rico, um I didn't I doubted things that I witnessed and I saw,
mhm,
and then when I looked at specific studies around it, I just would look up things that had directly to do with what somebody described to me, and there was a
mhm,
college from the States that went down there and investigated it and, looked into it, and sure enough, uh, there's, like, a lot of information that points to, yeah, these people are having real experiences,
mhm,
with this or that, or another, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you know what? That's funny, my sister just had that experience, or I just had an experience." I mean, sitting there, just having conversations with my siblings, and the door shuts, and the bathroom stuff just flushes, things that just, that my dad, who was physically brain dead for 2 days and miraculously popped 2 on the 3rd day like Christ. No, I'm just it's funny, but he was brain dead for 2 days.
Right.
Tells us there's stuff in the walls of the house,
Mm.
and then we experience things happening that he was telling us that were happening, and he shouldn't be able to really, from having that lack of oxygen, be able to coherently tell us that something was going on there, of course, there's a vast difference from some of the things that he said that made sense and then stuff that he was suffering from. But I won't get too much into that, but you start experiencing real things. And then I come here, and I work on a job site that has, in a building that's sitting on hundreds of years of history, right? I mean, hundreds of years. And it was about 5 a.m, and I remember getting ready for the day. I'm turning on the stuff for my post, and the X-ray machines, and this and that, and I'm sitting down, and literally I see somebody walk past, like Josh was talking about, something in the peripheral that walks past, right? Full body of a person, right? Walks past, right? Goes into the maintenance guy's room. The lights turn on, and the door handle jiggles like they're walking out, going to check stuff like they normally do. Didn't think nothing of it, because there's maintenance guys that are usually in the building. They don't usually come in that early, but sometimes they get there that early if there's something going on, right? Didn't think nothing of it. Matter of fact, I thought it was our maintenance guy that we saw on a regular basis, because it was about his height and everything. He comes 20 minutes later off the elevator, and I'm like, man, they got you running around already? And he's like, what do you mean? I just got here. And I'm like, hold on. Okay, so the doubter in me, the skeptic in me, right, immediately is, okay, look, I could have saw something out of the corner of my eyes, that could have been my eyes playing tricks, right? The light turning on, that could have been a mouse running in there, because, these big buildings, they have mice every once in a while, or roaches that can trigger the sensors. Yeah. But I could not explain to this day, the door handle jiggling, like something was trying to open that door.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I put those in a category of like, okay, I can't explain that. Similarly, I was doing a patrol in that building, and I'm walking by. I walk by the dark, offices with the lights turned off, right, all day long, right? Why would this one room catch my eye as I'm walking by, and I see a shadow as clear as day go from one side of that office to the next? And I'm like, okay, let me recreate this. Could have just been my glasses, light reflecting. Try to recreate it. I can't. Okay, put that in the unexplainable file, right? But what I couldn't do is ignore the other people that came down and said, look, is there something going on in this building that we should know about? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, look, I'm the only one up on the 3rd floor, and somebody walked in front of my office. And I went to look who it was, and I couldn't. And then I have other officers that say, look, I was doing a patrol, and as I'm walking in the middle of the night, this door slams in front of me. I go and I look in, and there's nothing there. So, like, now it's making it, you're piecing these stories together, and it's like, okay, there's something paranormal that's going on there. And sometimes, like Josh is saying, you can feel that heavy presence, and it's not necessarily good. Matter of fact, when something's good, right? I'm just, if you can pick up, people would call us empathic, I guess. I don't know. There's new agers come out with all sorts of sensitives and all this stuff. No, it's Holy Spirit. You're a spiritual being, and let's take it for what it is. Yes, you're going to be able to feel the evil, and you're going to feel that uneasy feeling of like the hair starts rising up. Natural response, right? Why? Because you're actually experiencing something. you know? And yes, sometimes I can say, yes, the mind plays tricks, obviously, you know, it has to. I mean, for us to even function, the mind has to be working, and, you know, not everything works right all the time. You know, I mean, that's
Right.
got to be common, right? But yeah, all that said is that like we've all had these experiences, you know, and I think how we try to gauge them and how we try to investigate them, they're not doing the best jobs. Now, there are some things that I think work, but it's like Josh said, it's not something you can you know, repeat all the time. If you catch something on camera, if you ever notice these guys, they catch something on camera, they can't catch it again,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And in the future episode, I really want to play some clips and get your guys' opinion, and we can have fun with that as well as part of this October series. But yeah, we'll go through some of those again as well. But I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna do like clips that what do you think about that versus, okay, look,
Mm-hmm.
this is a device. What do you think about this device, right?
Right.
But I'll let you guys speak a little bit. I've been talking too long.
That's okay. Well, and what I was thinking about what, as you're following along with what you were saying, and I was thinking about my friend from Kenya, and he was talking about is he's been getting involved in pastoring and pastoral ministry in America. He was asked by a family to go to the hospital to pray for their son, and he was in the psychiatric emergency unit, and my friend talked about how while he was there walking through the unit to go visit and pray for this young man, he was becoming physically ill because it felt so evil there. And talking about how we, in our inability to be open to something that is unmeasurable as a possible cause, that we go to scientific extremes. And so, you know, and if people start like, oh, I saw something, it wasn't there, then all of a sudden you wind up in psychiatric, medicated out of your mind. And that's no consideration given at all to the fact that there may be something that is involving something immeasurable with evil or energy or something like that, until you get into some of the more radical treatment programs, and then you're introduced to new age and meditation and all of that kind of stuff. So you're taken from medicated into oblivion to new age Eastern philosophy, which is dark in and of itself also. So we are programmed to even to not look at all to an extreme that we're doing harm to ourselves.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that those facilities that are running the more, let's say, extreme types of treatment for whatever
Mhm.
mental ailments people might be having are in fact the kinds of spirituality that are adverse to Christianity in general.
Mhm.
And Christians, who should be the people to stand in the gap for that, are the very ones who are heading up the skeptic parade in
Mhm.
terms of trying to debunk that. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing to try to eliminate all chance that something might be a physical phenomena that could be
Mhm.
misinterpreted, because when they do exorcisms, they do a lot of that. They have to rule
Mhm.
out all other
Yep.
possibilities in order to lawfully be able to do the exorcism as an exorcism, right? I think those checks and balances are useful, but
Yep.
those checks and balances are there because there's still the assumption that there's a spiritual reality undergirding the physical one, and that it interacts. And
Mhm.
most of medical science simply has to reject that outright because it relies primarily on a materialistic worldview, as it
Right.
is today.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think a lot of this is due to a very strange interplay of worldview ideas that are out there. And
Yeah.
ideation is, in fact, part of that spiritual reality that we've been talking about. And so a war of ideas is exactly the kind of thing that spirits would
Mhm.
want to employ if they were trying to shut people out of Christianity, convince you that God didn't exist, but that darkness was real and it had all the power. What better way to convince someone that they were absolutely helpless and hopeless unless they simply bowed the knee to whatever happened to be in front of them, this thing that
Mhm.
to them wrapped in
Yeah.
light, so to speak.
Yeah.
A lot
And
of
what
stuff
better
that
Yeah, but Josh, what better way to do it than to prey on our natural desire to get to understand and
Mhm.
experience the supernatural? What better
Yeah,
way to play off that, you know?
Genesis 3 style. It's
Yeah,
the same
Mhm.
thing.
absolutely. Mhm.
This is funny because last
Mhm.
Friday was the light and darkness episode, and there's a lot of that texture recurring tonight because
Yeah.
we're talking about
Mhm.
when there's light and people react adversely to it, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
there's things that are veiled to us that when they become unveiled, even momentarily, it can be our undoing because it's simply too much light. So
Mhm.
there are those things too, whereas like somebody can have an experience that kind of just sends them into madness, and it's not necessarily like a chemical imbalance or something. It really was exposure to something that was like too much light. They saw the nature of reality in some way that kind of broke their relation to consciousness. You know what I mean? Like it's a weird, again, this is very difficult stuff to have language to describe, but it's the
Mhm.
kind of thing that if we don't take it seriously, we're doing a serious disservice to those people who are in fact suffering from some of the things that you're talking about, because it's like, let's say it's no longer just the schizophrenic who thinks that the TV is talking to them, right? Now you have an
Mhm.
entire mainstream friendly spectrum of human beings who think that their physical body should be made absolutely irrelevant to their actual identity, and they think, well, I can be a woman, or I can be a fox, or I can define wholeheartedly that I'm neither or and nothing and everything all at
Mhm.
once. And it's like, okay, now you're in a place where some of that stuff is touching on the spiritual, it's touching on the non-physical, but there's still no hook to hang the hat on for somebody who doesn't have the backdrop of a tradition filled worldview that extends back thousands of years, that has all of the texture and solidity to inform a worldview like that. Like, they don't imagine having like an a la carte worldview
Mhm.
from the world's buffet, and you're trying to just include everything, but you don't have room for it. You don't know how to house it. You
Mhm.
alone are not going to construct a completed worldview on your own if the ones that we have that still feel incomplete are thousands of years old.
Dude, amen to that, bro. I mean, I was thinking as you're saying that too, Josh, though, what are some of the reasons why these people want to dismiss these traditions and
Mhm.
you know get away from them, and apart from, like I said, the warring aspect of our culture, but are there some things that these traditions have done, and we can
Mhm.
go back to each major branch of Christianity, that has really turned people off to those traditions?
Well, I think that there's an interesting, uh, I don't know what the word for it would be, maybe dichotomy, I'm not sure, of this uh, America being founded on this idea of rebellion and rejection of the old, but then there's also a subtle or not so subtle, depending on what area of life you're looking at, limitation on what you can push back on. So you're stuck in this weird place of, I have to rebel against everything, but there's things I can't rebel against. So then you really are stuck with, how do I work on framing and frameworking and understanding something that's outside of the accepted order of what you can rebel against, and you're taught to not really question, and not taught to think for yourself. You're just taught to react and parrot the thing that you're rebelling with. And there's not a real, there's a real lack in the whole process of learning and understanding in America, where you're taught to rebel and to reject, but you're not actually taught to think and to question and to try to understand variables outside of your understood math. And when you can't interact with ideas you have completely no framework for, you have nowhere to go. And so you have to go to an extreme to even take it in, because you have no framework to accept something that's such a different paradigm from what you're used to.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I also think that, one problem that we run into often is I don't even know how to explain this one, but people are fascinated with
Hmm.
the good old days, right? There's still something that they're holding on to with it still, even though they're trying to actively rebel
Yeah.
against the things that gave those good old days their good old days. Like, why is there such a
Hmm.
nostalgia of certain time periods? Like, why do I have this nostalgia for the 80s?
Hmm.
Besides that the 80s were freaking
Right.
awesome, man. I mean, Back to the Future, Star Wars,
Yes.
but
Absolutely.
the golden age of movies, but no, like, but I have this nostalgia about it.
Hmm.
But like, what was really good about it? Like, I mean, what was really good is that people had a respect for community. Why? Because those
Hmm.
traditions,
Hmm.
a large body of those traditions that we've kind of just thrown out because whatever reason were present in the people that were alive then. Like when I was able to go down the street and there's a block party
Hmm.
of neighbors that got together and are giving free hot dogs out, sodas for the kids, crime McGruff dogs there. The communities all participate,
Hmm.
you know. Nowadays you hardly know your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a lot of this yearning for the good old days, yet like there's still people rebelling in that time as well, But we have
Hmm.
this nostalgia. We get these feelings of like we're so fascinated with the past,
Hmm.
you know. Why is that? Why are we so fascinated by the past? Why? Because to me, I think there is something there that people
Hmm.
want to carry on into the future, and I think, you know, a lot of times they don't know how to go about it, and they're rejecting the very thing that could help us bring that past forward, the
Hmm.
good things from the past forward, you know?
But and I think we're seeing some of that in the movement of people abandoning in non-denominational and evangelical movements and flocking to Anglicanism and Orthodoxy and Catholicism because there is that weight of tradition and history, and it brings with it that because there is something, if you walk into a church that has that weight of that history, like an Orthodox church or a Catholic church, you can feel it immediately. It just feels like you're dwelling in a space, even if it's a new building. What the energy that they bring with it in their tradition, it makes it feel ancient, even if it isn't. But you walk into a traditional non-denominational or evangelical church, and it feels like the warehouse that it's in. I mean, there's no weight of this story. And I think as a participant in the story of history and the story of the Bible and the story of unfolding, when you disconnect from the story, you disconnect from your identity. And so we've lost that in that rejection of tradition. We've lost our connection to identity.
Well, that's a good point. Josh, what do you think?
Well, it's entirely possible that it's a tangent, but I think it's interesting that
Mhm.
when you bring up the past and our kind of fixation on the past,
Mhm.
how often, especially in America, when people have experiences with, let's say, even visually, with what they think is the manifestation of a ghost or an apparition or whatever, they happen to be things that were stored in the early days of the America that we reside in, Victorian
Mhm.
era and early, 1700 period clothing and items and women and garb of
Mhm.
maids or maidens and dresses and the dress of a military officer from the Civil War. And it's like these are some of the most common things that people report with apparitions, and it's something that ties them to a past that's still relevant to them in some sense. You know what I mean? So I think that there's something to that tie back there as well. It's not just nostalgia. It's like there's actually a thread there somewhere
Yeah.
that exists, like outside of my own subjective experience with the past. Somehow I'm linked with the past in a much bigger sense. Like Amber was talking about, is this like ongoing narrative in which I still reside. I'm not in a disjointed narrative from those times. I'm in the extension of that same narrative to now. I'm living in the same world where Abraham built altars to bring the past into the present with him.
Yep.
You know, like I think that should be the world that we live in, but it's often the case that, again, due to our feelings that we need to be comforted, that there's just this there's the weirdness of the universe. We want to shield ourselves from it, and so we make those separations and we try to pretend like that's not the same thing. That sometimes when the paranormal happens, it's like some other separate thing that's breaking in somehow. You know, it's like something invading rather than something that's just there all the time, even when you're not sensing it.
Right.
The same way that, like, you can always see your nose, but you don't know that until someone points it out, or you're something wrong with your nose, or there's something on it or something. But your eyes can always see, your nose is always in view of your eyes. And yet for the most part, you never know that it's there.
And I have to go cross-eyed, look at my nose. Like,
oh yeah, making me go cross-eyed here, Josh. I'm testing.
Yeah.
Seriously though, okay, so I'm gonna throw the question to you guys both, and you can answer whatever order you want to. What is a ghost?
Oh boy. I would have to say there's a couple different answers for that question. I think some of it would be the lingering presence of memory and loss of connection that is looking for something to connect to. And some of it, I think, would be actual evil, the spirit presence of evil that is there to mess with and interact with the physical world around it. I think maybe it's both, either or and kind of situation.
Okay. Josh?
I think the idea of like memory residue, if that sounds kind of crude, but that's basically like, if you like, okay, again, we're not merely a physical thing.
Right.
Kind of implicit in the idea of being the image of God, we can't simply be a physical thing. And so,
right,
you know, it's the combination of the material that God took from the earth and the breathing of his own breath, his own spirit, into the nostrils of Adam that created a soul, which is, according to scripture, the combination of the spirit and the body is what brought about the nefesh, the soul. And so it would seem like the cessation of the spirit from the body kind of, I don't want to say disintegrates, but rips the soul into a thing that it isn't, if that makes sense. Like you're taking something away from it that it relies upon to be itself. And so in a position like that, I don't see why it wouldn't be possible for some really strange things to occur. A lot of people want to assume, because of the way that we like to be dogmatic about things and create those lines of certainty, that if there are any experiences of the paranormal or any entity or any experience of what would seem like something that we call a ghost or a spirit, that it would have to be by definition demons or demonic, simply because of the fact that it's spiritual or paranormal. But I think that's to hand over more power than Satan deserves. But the idea in the opposite direction, that spirits are just things that exist in another realm, and that they're not, you know, there's like spirits are a neutral existence of some kind, and that they're like evil spirits or like a misnomer or whatever. They're just spirits that are adverse to the human person, but they're not actually evil, or some other such explanation. I think those things go too far in the opposite direction as well. And so a lot of the, and I'm sure we're aware of this, a lot of the times truth resides between two very uncomfortable extremes. And so I think that to say what a ghost is much more difficult than it would seem, especially because it's kind of a culturally defined term, ghost. Like I can say a spirit is, you know, breath or wind or life, or in the more abstract symbolic sense, or let's say the more personal agency,
a shadow of what was.
Sure, yeah, that's kind of that memory residue sort of, you know. But then you also have the idea that spirits themselves can be operative umbrellas of influence that spread themselves across multiple sets of consciousness, something like that. And so they give themselves body because they don't have body by using the embodied will of someone else. And so spirits will spread their consciousness by way of this umbrella of influence. And so in that sense, I don't know if you can call that a ghost, or if you would call that a spirit, or if that there's any ordinate way to make the separation between the two. But it's just hard to define because it's kind of a culturally defined, colloquialism.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I get you saying is just real no way to explain it.
not directly, not from the word ghost.
No,
I think the word
right.
Ghost is too ambiguous.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a broad term, right? So like, or a loaded term, should I say. Okay, so let me ask you this just to clarify real quick. Do you think there's a difference between, are you I want to say, I don't want to say tritheist, do you think there's a body, soul, spirit, or body, soul?
The word tripartite. That's the word. I don't think that the soul exists as something separate. I believe that the soul is the composite of spirit and body.
Okay.
I think that's the best way to understand it, Genesis 2 style, is that Adam became a living soul when he had a spirit and a body together, and the two together made nephesh.
Okay.
Not
So
in
yeah,
the
you're
same sense that
tripartite.
animals share in nephesh. Like you can say that it's tripartite, but it's kind of like
But it's nuanced
tripartite. Yeah, the soul is the containment of the spirit and the body, something like that, or the emerging reality of the two combined. Like if you took hydrogen and oxygen molecules and put them together, they're not hydrogen molecules, oxygen molecules, and water molecules. Water molecules are hydrogen and oxygen together, period. It's a new thing that emerges.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. And where would the soul and conscience, could that ever be separated? Or the spirit's consciousness be separated from the soul's consciousness? And they share as one, but could they be separated?
I think that separation is what it would mean to be disembodied or dead and not resurrected.
Yeah.
What happens to that disembodied consciousness? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, like, for me, I firmly believe that, once we die, we're with Christ, right? We're in his presence. But that's not to say that what creates us to that one containment of a being, an entirety of a being, because obviously we're not probably our full selves there, right? Because we're going to be getting resurrected bodies at the end, right? Is there maybe there's something to that soul being left behind that may still have a lingering part of consciousness to it, that could be what causes an intelligent haunt, maybe? I mean, I don't know. It's theorizing at this point, but I'm just.
I think that it's, since it's speculation, I think it's entirely possible that okay, since I think
that's a ghost. That is a ghost. No,
since I think in images, I think it makes sense to think about it in the sense that when something becomes disembodied, it doesn't lose its identity, it loses the fullness of its expression materially, right? And so in the same sense that, let's say, in a story or in a painting, in art, in a movie or a play or whatever, if you want to indicate to an audience without words, you show them rather than tell them. You want to indicate to the audience that something enchanted is happening. You can use mist that is illumined, right? Yep. Versus if you want to imply to the audience or indicate to the audience that something evil is afoot, something that is hidden, or a haunting that is taking place, you use mist that is dark. And mist is literally nothing more than water that lacks body right now. Because a body of water is water collected. It's a physical thing. It's there. It's on the ground. It's, you know what I mean? It can either be bitter or sweet, but mist is something else. It's disembodied water that's sort of in the air, and it's mixed with spirit. spirit being air, wind, breath, in, out, speaking. And so in that sense, it's interesting to think that, like, going back to a more like a less modern materialist enlightenment mindset, going back to something that would have been less distinct and the edges less defined, there was more elbow room, you would understand that when somebody breathed or spoke and it was night out, but there was light enough to see them, usually it was cold and their breath was visible. And you would think, there it is. You know what I mean? And so the idea that a mist or that something that lacks body could be like intuitively associated with something that was either enchanted or haunting, I think kind of lends itself to saying that maybe there's an actual reality that undergirds that intuition. And it's not just our, fear of the dark, so to speak.
Right on. Yeah, no, I get it, man. I get it. I think they're right to have different categories of hauntings, because I think you're right to say that, these things, to be able to say that, as you're saying earlier, to be able to like define what a ghost is. I think that's a loaded term too. I always have, and I think they're right to categorize different types of hauntings, because I think one thing that has been consistent here is that there's some of the stuff that is paranormal that's actually demonic, right? And I think Josh is right to point out that there's some things that we automatically classify as demonic when we probably shouldn't, right? So I definitely agree with that. I think a ghost should be categorized as more than just one thing, right? We use it as a blanket term. That's fine too. We're humans. We do stuff like that. But specifically, I think that, I've always thought that there is, like Josh is saying, more to the spectrum of reality than we we give credit to, right? Because we don't experience it. So it's kind of easy to shut it off. But like, I think if there's a high impact, and I think of the battlefields every time I do this, where a lot of life was lost, a lot of energy was expended, a lot of that separating of the soul and body, that energy that just, I think it imprints, kind of like when a photograph is taken and you see the flash afterwards, right? I think it could be residual haunts, could be something like that. Like you hear, it is well known, even in Virginia and some of these battlefields, that you can hear drummers, the gunfire, the flutes playing, people screaming, fighting and stuff like that, and it's faint. And maybe at some point that will degrade to the point where you won't hear it anymore. But I think that could be lend to a non-intelligent, um, style haunt. I think Josh put some stuff in perspective as well when it comes to, the soul being taken from the body. There could be, if we're theorizing, part of that consciousness left behind that could be, trying to communicate or whatever, but from my experience, I have always thought, anything that's like an intelligent haunting is most likely demonic, because we're playing with a part of reality that we're not really best experiencing, so we can get easily tricked, right? We can get easily tricked. And why wouldn't that be the perfect opportunity for the evil try to play on that, to make us think something else, and the next thing you know, we're 10 feet further from the Lord than we should be. And I can see that, like, the screw tape letters are a perfect example of
Yeah.
how the demonic play,
Yeah.
Nefarious, the book, I swear the person that wrote that movie was a C.S. Lewis fan,
Oh yeah.
so like, I think that's how things would operate. Um so to me, to define a ghost, you'd have to look at like 5 different definitions. And I'm sorry, but the demonic's there. Maybe the other one's speculative, but that's kind of my take on it. So I mean, then we have to get to, okay, if we're experiencing this, how do we engage it? How do we investigate it further? And yes, I do think that, yes, we can use our equipment like video cameras and stuff like this to try to catch things. But there's a handful of equipment that people are using that I think just don't make me believe at all. One of them being, and I'll show you guys this one, this device up here that's got the light on it, right? That says pod on it. They call that a REM pod. Okay. And it's supposed to gauge when it's picking up I can't remember the REM spelled for now, but anyways, it's picking up electromagnetic fields, right? Supposedly, and when it picks it up, it's like somebody walking by it, it goes off, right? And that's supposedly like a ghost walking by it, right? Well, if you look at like people that actually study these things and they take them apart, they're super simple devices, right? That you could probably make yourself at home.
Right.
And when they put it together and they basically label it ghost hunting equipment, you're looking at something that could cost you probably $30 to make, and now it's going for 200, right? Because it's got that label of REM pod or ghost hunting equipment, right?
Right.
And not only that, but then they find out because of how simple these devices, and there's articles on this left and right, right? Skeptical Inquirer does one on it, and just like cell phone usage could trip, like radio waves and stuff that are just out there, could trigger some of these devices, especially when like the other one on here, the EMF, which looks like that little device. It's to the bottom left. That device there, people claim that whenever it goes up and down, it's getting a electromagnetic frequency, right? And they said, look, phones from are even radio waves and phone waves from miles away could trigger something like that. So what they're doing is they're using this equipment that could basically be giving them false positives the whole time. But they're like, yeah, ghost, because this thing's walking in front of it, it goes off, therefore ghost. So then they start trying to experiment with it, right? And then they're claiming they get direct responses because these things go off right when they say it. Well, maybe somebody sent you a text the same time you asked the question. How do I know that? Why am I going to believe that? If this device is such a simple device where, anything can pick up on it, I'm not sure how I can believe that. However, there are some devices that I think, like our video camera, you catch something, and I'm going to bring in some clips in the future. I know we're getting to the end, but in the next episode, I want to bring some footage that has actually been found, and that I can't say, hey, look, this is fake. This is I can't explain this. So I'll put it in that category, right? Yeah, because there's always a level of skepticism with me if somebody else records it, right? Because I don't know if you're faking it. I don't know if you've done something or doctored the video. I'm not a pro at that, but I'll put it in the unexplained, right? I'll put it there, right? And then there's like the EVP devices. Now, look, there is a problem with EVP devices, electronic voice phenomena, right? Why? Because these devices are meant to get things at a higher frequency than you're supposed to be able to get, or you're able to hear here, right? Just normally, right? So the problem is, and there's another article on this, they discovered that, radio waves, not radio waves, I don't want to say waves, but the voices from the radio, like the they go out to space, right? Have you ever heard, like, the further you go out to space, you could be able to hear our broadcasts from like 50 years ago or whatever? You could be catching that those frequencies with those devices and not even know it, you know? A big one they use now is called the spirit box, right? It's it supposedly runs through uh radio frequencies very fast, you know, like seconds, milliseconds. However, they don't tell you. Oh yeah, and the ghost is able to manipulate it and make intelligible words out of it. However, what they lack to know is how these frequencies, how the AM and FM frequencies work. Like you could have a bandwidth, right, of one radio station that covers like eight to 10 bandwidth points, right? And basically you can get a word out of that as it's going fast. It's maybe not necessarily a ghost and responding to you. And then there's the interpretation aspect. What are you actually hearing? Does it say this or does it say that? But then there are some of those voice phenomenon like the EVPs that actually I can't quite say is a radio frequency because the person asks it a direct question and you get a direct answer, like a very prominent, and those are like, your high class EVPs that they would call them. But there's a lot of stuff to be skeptical about. And what are your guys' opinion with some of these things that I've been saying? I'll just get that before we head out.
I think there's just so much space and so much room.
Is there a good way to test these things?
Is there a good way to test them? I don't know how you measure the immeasurable. There's so many ways to get false positives on that stuff that, I mean, it gives you a place to start, but you always got to look at it with suspicion. If your cell phone, if you get a text from your mom and that's going to skew your results every time you get a text message from somebody, I don't know how you would measure with the physical realm, the non-physical realm with any kind of scientific reliability that would pass a peer review. I just don't know how you would do it in a kind of credible way.
Right.
The difficulty is that shamans and witches have been doing it for millennia, and they developed a system by which they could do it with bones, with formless things that create, we call it pareidolia now, but the ability to see patterns across multiplicity, and then discern from the patterns symbolic intuitions that tell you this or that, and then being able to map that onto things. And then there's, let's say, the mental placebo effect of self-fulfilling prophecy and all those other sorts of things that make it very difficult to try to be, like I said, to approach something that doesn't lend itself to an objective standard and try to take it apart objectively, I think is a disadvantage. That it's like a non-starter, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to be scientific about the immaterial is by definition nonsensical to me, because science is a method of measuring the material reality that we inhabit, and science lends itself to measuring and interacting with material reality. The things that we're trying to measure in this instance are things that aren't confined to material reality and aren't repeatable experiments in, let's say, like you make this like contrived experience that you can write down, create steps for, and somebody on the other side of the planet can do the exact same steps and get the exact same results. That's how science works. That is not how ghosts work. Like, that is not how any kind of spiritual operative reality really works until you get into the things that we now call superstition, right? That people would see a black cat and think that that means something, that something will happen because of, that there's a causal link between this and that, right? Yeah. And we've gotten really good at creating the causal link of physical reality and measuring and testing and understanding its reliability. And because of that, we've decided off top that it doesn't work the other way around, and that the non-physical can't affect the physical, especially if we say non-physical meaning spiritual, because it's kind of excluded from the outset in a worldview that's based on nothing but objective, scientific study and observation and so forth. It's very difficult because it's like, love, you don't get to measure love. Love is not a objective standard measurement sort of phenomena. It is plainly in the spiritual reality. And yet here it is affecting physical reality constantly. You know what I mean? So it's like the idea that, you know, also the spirit or your consciousness or your mind or whatever you want to give a title to the thing that you call I or me, that thing is immaterial and it affects material reality through you all the time. And so, you know, that's one of the things that makes it very difficult to measure. You don't get to cut open a brain and find an organ called self in there. You don't cut open your chest and find something called soul inside. Like, those are the things that make us skeptical, is that it's not part of the observable physical regularity. And because it doesn't have that regularity and it doesn't play by those rules, we figure skepticism is an ordinate reaction. And I don't think that we're necessarily wrong for skepticism in most cases. Again, especially in the cases of the extreme, like a demonic possession or things like that. But I think that skepticism can often defeat its own end and eat itself when it stops inquiry before it happens by deciding dogmatically that something should be excluded. The same way that if an atheist starts to try to investigate history and say, I want to find out if a genuine miracle occurred here or here, but they just start by assuming that miracles are impossible, they're not going to find any evidence of a miracle. They won't. They cannot. It cannot be made relevant to them. They won't perceive it, because they've decided beforehand that it's not a feature of reality. And so it won't be able to feature in their investigation. And so you have people who are going to look for ghosts, and sometimes they're skeptics and they'll find things and they'll always find a reason that it isn't. And then you'll find people who are wholesale convinced of ghosts. They'll find something, they'll say it's evidence and say, here it is, you won't convince me otherwise. And then it's the same data that brings about both responses. You know what I mean? And it's connected to the intuition of the person from prior to the investigation that actually brings about the results, rather than the data necessarily. And so it's kind, that's what I think makes it very difficult, is that we're bringing the same skepticism to ghost hunting that we would bring to black cats and walking under ladders.
Right. Absolutely. Well, guys, I want to thank you for the conversation. It's been great so far. I can't wait to actually get into some of these actual devices and really go through some of these articles and some clips that we'll discuss and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to that, and I will be putting that together soon for you guys. Did you guys have fun tonight? I mean, did you think it was Josh discussing these things? Was it something you want to do again with videos and stuff to start talking about some of these methods?
I remember when we did, I think it was last year in October, we did a ghost reaction video, or maybe it was 2 years ago. We did a reaction video where we watched a bunch of scary stories and spooky videos and just did a reaction video to that. I thought that was a hoot. That was so fun.
Oh yeah.
And so I would be totally down to do this again. Yeah.
All right.
Especially because of the way that it overlaps with some of the things that I'm obsessed with, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Right on. Amber?
Yeah. Oh, this was a lot of fun. I don't normally just jump onto live streams, but this is a topic that I think is kind of fun to talk about. So I've had a good time and appreciate, just being able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. Josh, do we have anything coming up?
Next week, Tyler had rescheduled his episode about the rise and fall of the papacy to next Friday. And then after that, the second week of October, I am not sure if we have anything scheduled for that. But the third week of October, I'm going to try for the next Cosmic Corner episode. And that's either going to be an expansion of the discussion on light and darkness, or it's going to be a discussion on what was that? I forget how I phrased it, but basically the idea of like the human person's identity across time, sets of transformation, and the remainder of identity, something like that. But those are the two ideas that are pressing in the back of my mind right now: is continuity of identity across time and expanding the light and darkness conversation. So be on the lookout for that, and I'll be decided shortly on which one I'd prefer.
Right on. Well, yeah, guys, again, thank you for being here. Audience, thank you for participating and typing in the chat and so forth. These conversations are always fun, and because it's October, we like to we like to play around with the paranormal a little bit. So I hope you guys have a great night. And as Tyler says, good night, God bless, and stay like Christ.